When I say World War II, what comes to your mind? You know, World War II is unique for a lot of things. But I think one of the things that kind of separated World War II, one of the things that I find fascinating was the fact that because of that war, you had so much unity in this nation. You had so many people that were coming together for a common purpose to combat what everybody would agree at that time was an evil. And I think, you had the men, of course, that went off to fight in battle. They went off into the trenches. But then you had the women that were here, and they had to raise the children, and they had to run the shops and the stores while the men were away fighting. And even those shops and those facilities, a lot of them, they were geared towards peacetime and luxuries and comforts. And it was like, okay, we're at war here. Our way of life is being threatened. No more can we accommodate those luxuries and those comforts. Now, when you created one thing, now we need you making weapons and artillery and ammunition. All these things geared towards a common goal, which was the victory in that war. There are many sad things about that war, but one thing I find discouraging is we were united, but it wasn't until Japan bombed us. It wasn't until Japan came and brought the war to America that we woke up. You say that when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, they woke the sleeping giant, right? So prior to that, we were content with so many people dying, heinous and cruel deaths. We were so content with just kind of ignoring it, putting it in the back of our mind, not thinking about it, living for the here and the now, while war was waging all over the globe. And the reason I bring this up is because I see a parallel. I see a parallel between the sleeping giant that was America then and the sleeping giant that is the American Christian today. There is war that is waging on all around us. You don't have to go to another country to experience this war. It is waging on all around you here and now in the United States. It's all around. Some of the evidence of this war, think about what is being heavily publicized just recently with these ISIS terrorist groups. These Muslim extremists that are killing and persecuting Christians all over. And I think, we think about it now because it's publicized, it's in the news, and I'm convicted because prior to that, I really didn't pray for my brothers and sisters that are in the trenches, that are actively engaged in this war. I thought very little of them because I'm consumed with what I'm doing here and now. But this murdering of Christians who profess Christ, they're given an ultimatum. You either deny Christ and maybe you can live, but if you profess Christ, surely you're going to die, and you and your family will die. But see, none of this is new. We may be thinking about it now today, but it's been going on for a very long time. I want to read a couple of statistics that I looked up, and these are more recent statistics, but Open Doors, they're a non-denominational group, and they support persecuted Christians worldwide. They said that in 2013, there were 2,123 Christians that were killed in that year. And I think, man, just to put that in contrast, the deadliest year that we had in the war in Iraq was in 2007, and 904 U.S. troops gave their lives. And it's a tragedy, no matter how you look at it, but 2,000 plus Americans died trying to bring the gospel message to people overseas. And in 2012, there was 1,201. And last year, there were 1,213 deaths just in Syria alone. And you think about, that is tragic that Christians are losing their life, but we know that after they die, they get to share a crown of glory. But there are millions of lost people that will die as a result of this war, that will spend an eternity apart from Christ because we so often are disengaged. Switching gears a little bit, according to Rainier Research, approximately 70% of American youth drop out of church between the ages of 18 and 22. You got a pretty daunting task right now. 70% of American youth drop out of church between the ages of 18 and 22. And the Berna Group estimates that 80% of those reared in church will be disengaged by the age of 29. 80% of those raised in the church will walk away from Christ by the age of 29. I mean, how is this happening? How is it happening? And it's happening right under our noses. And I think this enemy that we are up against is just laughing because we're asleep. We don't even realize what's going on. Now, of course, statistics are statistics and these things could be skewed, but you can't deny that a vast majority of people are walking away from Christ. Or they're maybe professing Christ, but they're really not living for Him. I propose that the reason why this is happening and things like it are happening and it's so abundant in the American church is because we live like we're at peace when we are at war. We live like we're at peacetime. Look at a couple contrasts between peacetime and wartime. What is our mentality? Because I promise you, your mentality changes. I've both experienced peacetime here and I've been in combat zones. And there is such a difference in your mentality. When you're locked on, you're engaged. Peacetime, your guard is down. You're unengaged. There's not really a threat around, so you can kind of think about other things. You're not really focused on the enemy. You're not really focused on wartime efforts. You're living in peace. Your feet are kicked up. But in wartime, your senses are heightened. You're aware of everything that's going on around you. Nothing just happens without reason. You have purpose and you have meaning and you have a goal. And the things that you do are geared towards that goal and that purpose and that meaning. I think about many veterans that have this mentality. They have this awareness of a threat that's so ingrained in them. You know, we'll be walking down a crowded street or through a mall or something and constantly looking at hands. Hands, 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 hands. You can't even help it. Or you sit in a room like this that's crowded and you'll strategically look for a seat maybe over there in the back where someone can't come up behind you, but you've got a great visual of everybody that's in the room. There's some of these things that you can't turn off. They're just so heavily ingrained in you. For 2 Timothy 2:4, Paul is talking to Timothy, a young man of God. And he reminds him, he says, Timothy, no soldier gets entangled in civilian pursuits, since his aim is to please the one who enlisted him. Timothy, soldier of God, enlisted in God's army, do not get entangled in all of the nonsense. Don't get entangled in civilian pursuits. Keep your eyes focused on God and pleasing Him. Peacetime, we are entangled in meaningless pursuits. When we're at peace, we have the luxury, at least so we think we have the luxury, to go and invest in bigger and better houses. We want bigger and faster cars. We want better careers. That's where our focus is. And I'm not saying that a lot of those things are wicked or evil in and of themselves, but think about where our focus is. Realistically, if you had an invading army that was marching down your street, you would care little about those things. You wouldn't care how big your home is. You wouldn't care how fast your car is. You wouldn't care if you're going to get the next promotion at work. You would care about your survival, the safety of those that you are going to protect. Ralph D. Winter writes this. How hard have we tried to save others? Soldiers in God's army, what are we pursuing? Where are our resources going to in this fight? How hard have we tried to save others? The money American evangelicals spend on missions is 1/4 of what they spend on weight loss programs. What are our pursuits? What do we deem as important as this war is waging on all around us? Peacetime, we're disengaged. We're not looking out for the enemy because we really don't believe that an enemy exists. And if we do believe that an enemy exists, we don't think that they are going to bring us harm. And you know, the irony of that is, if you're not really living for Christ, this enemy may not bring you harm. They may not. Wartime, you have identified that enemy. You've geared all your resources towards combating that enemy. You realize that he's a threat. And you go to battle. So if we want to take on this wartime mentality, we have to understand who is the enemy. Who is the enemy? Is it the Muslim extremists that are killing Christians? Is it atheist groups who hate God? And let's be realistic. Atheists definitely hate God. But here in America, they have a special hatred towards Christ and Christians. Is it secular groups? Is it pluralism? Is it secularism? Is it all these other isms that oppose God? Who are we to engage? Ephesians 6:12, Paul says this. For we do not wrestle, we do not literally fight against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. That is our enemy. Our enemy is not flesh and blood, so it can't be all of those groups that I listed before. Paul says that it's the spiritual evil forces that are over this dark world. It's Satan and his army that he is leading. We are going to identify that enemy, and if we are truly looking to go into war with this enemy, we want to be engaged, we have to pick a weapon. You think about in battles throughout history, man has always gone onto the battlefield with a weapon. Always. Whether it be a stick or a stone, or you get into more advanced warfare, and now we have knives, we have spears, and we have guns. We've got tanks, we've got aircraft carriers, we've got all of these different weapons that you can choose from. And they are very good in combating enemies comprised of flesh and blood. But that is not our enemy. But we still must take a weapon with us into battle. Paul goes on to tell us in Ephesians 6:17, he says, take the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. Your weapon is the sword of the Spirit. It is the Word of God. You see, when I was on a SWAT division, our military training required us to know our weapon systems. These things could save our lives. They could save the lives of many other people. So we had to know everything about that weapon system. I had to be able to disassemble and reassemble. I had to know the trajectory, the range. I had to know all the components and the inner workings. I couldn't just know that the gun was going to fire. I had to know why it was going to fire. So it is with the weapon that we wield. We must know this weapon. We have to know it. We have to know what's in it. We have to know the components. We have to know the inner workings, the nomenclature. We need to know the weapon that God has given us to go against this enemy. But see, the other part about a weapon system is many people in this room, they could look up any of these weapons that I've named off today. You could look them up on Google, you could research them, and you could be an expert. You could know all the nomenclature. You could know all the disassembly. You could know the range and the distance that it's accurate at. You could know all of these things. But if I put that weapon in your hand and put you on a battlefield, how accurate would you be with it? If I brought in my service weapon, my Mark 18 .556 caliber, and put it in your hand, to a lot of people it'd just be a big club. A very good weapon system in war, but in the hands of the wrong person, it's rendered useless. If I brought in a tank, I'm pretty sure anybody in this room, if we got into the cockpit of that tank, very good in fighting in war, but with us behind the helm, it'd be a big steel construction. I mean, we would not know how to use that tank. So it is with the Word of God. If I take this weapon that God has given us to combat the enemy, that is far superior and greater than any man-made weapon, if I put it in your hands, how useful is it? Is that Word of God written on your heart? Do you know it? But then, not only do you know it, are you accurate with it? Have you gone out into combat with it? Do you know how to use it? And do you use it well? This is the weapon in which God has given us. Know it. Know how to use it. And use it. Because the battle is waging right now. Not later. Not at another date. But right now. Are you a soldier? This war is going on. You can deny that it's going on, or you can accept that it's going on, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it is going on. It is waging all around us. Are you a soldier that's actively engaged in this war? You see, I think our problem is we don't understand that when you profess Christ, and God has given you a new nature, and He puts His very Spirit inside of you, you have just enlisted in God's army, and you are a soldier. See, so often we think in America, I hear it in circles time and time again, this doubt, this uncertainty. Am I a soldier? I don't know if I'm a soldier. I don't know if I'm saved. Christians, we are to examine ourselves, but that is step one. That's step one. You are saved and you are a soldier, and He's put you on the front lines, and now you're to go out into battle. We can't just go back and forth and wonder, am I saved, am I not? Am I a soldier, am I not? It makes no sense, and you are useless if you don't even know whether or not you're a soldier in God's army. You see, and I think the reason why we go back and forth on this so much is because we very rarely, if ever, go into battle. We don't go into battle, and that's why we have doubts. There's no soldier on the front line that's in a foxhole and he's firing weapons at the enemy, and then he stops for a second and says, "Oh, gee, am I a soldier?" It doesn't make sense. If you are actively engaging the enemy, you know you're a soldier. And God will use you. As I get to closing, I wanted to read a quote by Jim Elliot. Jim Elliot is an extraordinary man. He was a soldier that God used. He went out into hostile territory to spread the word of God, to spread that salvation comes through Christ. And the very same people that he was proclaiming this truth to, they took his life. So While what I'm going to read is kind of hard to listen to, I believe that Jim Elliot is qualified to say it. He says this: we are so utterly ordinary, so commonplace, while we profess to know a power the 20th century does not reckon with. But we are harmless, and therefore we are unharmed. We are spiritual pacifists, non-militants, conscientious objectors in this battle to the death with the principalities and powers in high places. Meekness must be had for contact with men, but brass, outspoken boldness is required to take part in the comradeship of the cross. We are sideliners, coaching and criticizing the real wrestlers while content to sit by and leave the enemies of God unchallenged. The world cannot hate us. We look too much like its own. And then he ends with the most profound statement. He says, "Oh, that God would make us dangerous." Oh, that God would make us dangerous. You see, when a soldier prepares for battle, he goes through combat training. He goes through whatever weapon system training. He goes through all kinds of trainings in one effort to make him dangerous to the enemy. To make that soldier as dangerous as possible to those that he would go and fight against. Likewise, when we have Bible studies, when we have precept studies, when we have small group studies, when we come here on Sundays to worship God and listen to a message, we should be looking like that as training, making us dangerous to the enemy. If you go to Bible studies and you go to all these other studies to learn the Word of God, to learn your weapon system, and you're not dangerous to the enemy because you're not engaging them, then you're useless. It doesn't make sense how much you know your weapon or how much you know about what you ought to do if you are not doing it. If you're not actively engaging that enemy, then what is the point? Like in World War II, we willingly remained disengaged and uninterested to the war that was waging on all over the world. Likewise, here in American Christianity, what will it take to wake this sleeping giant, American Christians, to no longer be content with our own selfish desires, but to realize that there is seriously a war that is waging, and we must engage in that war?